It is February 17th, 2023.
This is As the World Burns, tying polls, prediction markets, and forecasting into current affairs and news. I'm your host, Randall Burns.
Today we're covering predictions from George Soros on what Russian defeat in the Ukraine may mean. George Soros is what we in the financial industry used to call a master of the universe. That means he's the type of investor who's big enough that his words can easily move markets, and other investors really need to be aware of what he is doing. He's one of the richest men in the world. He would be much richer if he hadn't founded the Open Society Foundations, which have been a major portion of his involvement in recent years. And he's been a major political activist, both in the United States and Europe. You've heard of some of his activities, most likely. I'll link to his Wikipedia article so you can learn a little more if you're so motivated. But he recently commented that Russian defeat in the Ukraine would mean dissolution of what he called the Russian Empire. We are going to go over some of the relevant meticulous questions and tie this into that. First, a small history lesson is in order. The region in which this war is taking place is not historically really part of Russia. It's a fairly recent acquisition. At one point, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was one of the largest and most influential countries in Europe, and gave the world figures like Copernicus. Part of what's important to understand, and you can read this in the Wikipedia article, is that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth had a very real democratic and rule by law tradition, very different from what we see within Russia. The region was effectively conquered by Russia for 120 years. There was a new Poland after World War I, which incorporated much of the present region under contention. And then Stalin grabbed it after World War II. So, this area has been very much in play for a while now. So the first relevant meticulous question involves substantial territorial loss by Russia by 2030. Now, I think this time frame may be a little bit too tight for what Soros had in mind, but it gives us a start. I mean, right now, the conventional wisdom is like less than 10%. It's not very likely. Now, this is a conditional claim on large-scale conflict within Russia, and it has to do with the likelihood of large-scale conflict if Russia cuts a deal and ceases fire in the next year, or if they persist making war in the Ukraine. There does appear to be some conditional difference on this one. It appears that it is better for them to try to make peace sooner rather than later. And here's one of the constituents of the conditional large-scale conflict within Russia by 2030. It seems like there's a little bit of downward momentum. I think that may be under the assumption that Russia will cut a deal and start to back down within the Ukraine. I tend to think this is a little more likely than is commonly appreciated, that they will have internal conflict because of this war, but we'll see. This question is on whether there'll be the bilateral ceasefire before the end of 2023. It does not appear likely. It does appear like a possibility. I'm kind of in the no man's land between two camps on this one, and we'll just have to see how this plays out. It does appear to be in Russia's interest to cut a deal and get the ceasefire to happen. If Russia ceases to hold new territory other than the Crimea, that's an indicator of a defeat, I would say. And that appears to be unlikely right now, but a real possibility. So we'll just have to kind of watch this one and see how that one plays out. The reverse is true of Ukraine controlling territories that Russia has occupied. And that appears unlikely that they will be able to reverse that. But with the Leopard tanks, that's at least a possibility. I'm kind of on the tail of the probabilities on that one. I think it's more like I give their tanks more chance than many others. One of my favorite professors was in a resistance unit in World War II, and he had a lot of respect for the Ukrainians as soldiers. Another major indicator is Ukrainian loses control of Sevastopol by the end of 2023. That appears again to be unlikely at this point, but there's at least a slight possibility. I'm kind of in the low end of the they lose it camp, but again, it's by no means anywhere near certain. Another indicator is yet another of Russia's territorial disputes, this time on the other side of the world, which is the Kuril Islands near Japan, which have been under dispute for a long time now. I think this one is interesting because Japan is a creditor nation, and if Russia gets really hard up for cash at some point, this may be a way for them to get some quick cash by cutting a deal on those islands, which they're really not doing very much with. So unfortunately, we don't immediately have good numbers on the likelihood of a Russian defeat. We do have some indicators. We can see how this plays out this year. We have indicators that would indicate a defeat is happening or that it's coming. I think the aftermath may be of interest to some listeners. This is a question on a U.S.-Russia war before 2050, which I think is a reasonable time frame for this to play out. And there's more questions on Metaculus relating to this, so I'll put them in their own video and discuss this if I see any interest on this. But this is an event that it's going to be shaping our world. I hope that however it plays out, that it's managed in such a way that Russia can be stabilized. I don't think this fall of the Soviet Union was handled optimally by the United States and others. And I will try to get some better Metaculus questions up to address this issue. Right now, I think everything is too short-term focused. I think it's going to take longer to resolve this situation. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate the support. Likes, comments, suggestions for future episodes, all are very much appreciated. Follow me on Twitter or on YouTube. I appreciate that also. It helps out my efforts a lot.